To God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. Well, it's coming up to my vacation week, and every week we take a week down the shore. And 24 years ago, we went down the shore. Kim and I were engaged. It was our summer before we got married, and we invited my brother, then he had 2 kids, and my mother to the beach house. So my mother said, of course, what can I bring? Do you want me to bring a lasagna? I said, yeah, Ma. Everybody at the Jersey Shore, you could see them out with their grills having lasagna. No. So we said, no, Ma, really, like no meals, because then my brother and I got to realize she will bring down a meal for every week at a house. Can anyone here relate to that? I don't know. She'll have, chicken and peppers one night, jambot another, macaroni, and so on. So we said, let's try to strategize to contain her. Okay. So we said, how about this? We'll tell her, just bring a little fruit. Because, we have fresh market sets up right down by the house. Just bring some fruit. Ma, just bring some fruit. Okay? So my brother Henry that morning goes to pick up my mother and drops, he says, I'll go to the market and get the order of fruit. You guys go and say hello to Grandma, boom, boom, get her ready to come. My brother drives and double parks like everybody in the city there. The order from Mark Antonio. Yeah, back it up. He has a minivan. Back it up. Now he's already packed for 4 people for a week, 5 people for a week down the shore. So he has to move everything. Boxes of fruit. Watermelons, plural. Cantaloupes. Peaches, nectarines, bananas, grapes, boxes of fruit. So my brother has to move everything, gets to the house, and I wasn't there, but knowing he's a Mark Antonio, I could hear him and seeing him puffing and huffing and cursing too, and rearranging everything in the car. Now he has to put luggage on the roof of the van, okay? So he ties it up the best that he could. Let me repeat that. The best that he could onto the roof of the van. He has my mother, his wife, my my niece, my nephew in the car, driving over the Driscoll Bridge, over the Raritan River. So some of us have done that 1,000 times. My nephew goes, I just saw your bag fly off the top of the car. Pulls over, sure enough, Aileen's bag is done. She's a 12-year-old girl who doesn't wear anything, right? 12-year-olds. And okay, they refasten everything. My brother gets to the house, and he has to go off to Target to buy a whole wardrobe for his daughter, who has nothing to wear for an entire week. So we call that the $170 worth order of fruit. This is $170, 1998 prices, right? 97 prices to buy a whole new wardrobe. So foolish us, we thought for a moment that we could contain my mother's love and bounty. That's how foolish we were, right? So this fits in well here, not just because I'm going to vacation soon, but we have the 2 stories today of David and Jesus. And today, as I told you, with David, when he was very good, he was good. He was good, he was very good. When he was bad, well, today, he's at his worst. And I invite you to go to the Bible to read the rest of these machinations that he did to have Uriah killed in battle. Doesn't end here. There was even a point where he could have been spared, but David makes sure he gets killed in battle. And he tries to get him to sleep with Bathsheba before he goes off, but as a faithful soldier, when in battle, they refrain from sexual relations. And he was a Hittite. He was an outsider, right, of the faith. And so David, very, very bad. He continues, we have a whole tradition of powerful political leaders who are adulterous and murderous, either or and or both, right? And that continues up to this day, right? And yet, first of all, the Bible, some people think this is a holy book and it spares no detail to the murderous character and the adulterous character of David. No detail is spared. There's no smoothing over this King David, right? And by the way, we call Jesus Son of David. He's from the house of David. Wow. Wow. So we're a people. Holy, yes, but man, nothing spared on what we can do. And so we see here that David, and we'll want to tune in next week, because next week we'll see the other side of David, and we see Nathan the prophet, one of the greatest, drop the mic stories in history, and tune in next week to Nathan. I'm sure I'll mention that somehow. So we see in this story of David that not only does he survive this in the history of Israel, but he is the beneficiary of the love and mercy of God, despite these horrible acts we perhaps, hopefully, can't imagine ourselves doing. Although St. Augustine said, there is no sin I am incapable of imagining myself doing. The holiness of St. Augustine. So, that's one story. There is no containing the love and mercy of God. There's no limits to the mercy of God. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. Now we have to go back to John. Hey, this is supposed to be Mark's cycle, right? Well, we got to throw John in once in a while, right? And remember 2 weeks ago or so, Mark, find a place to rest, and they go off, and it was chopped up a little. In between that chopping up was this story of feeding the thousands. As a matter of fact, this miracle, or in John, sign of Jesus, is the only one that is common to all 4 gospel accounts. And no doubt it reflects the early Christians' tradition of celebrating some form of Eucharist with bread and wine, with something to eat. Okay? So, Jesus feeds the 5,000. Let's look at that story. First of all, obviously, my mother wasn't there. Otherwise, the number would be brought down to 4,500 or something like that, or so on. But Jesus gives this bread of life, and we'll be staying on this story. John can't tell a story in 15 verses. He needs a whole chapter. He has a whole chapter on the bread of life. Doesn't have the words of institution, the Last Supper words, but has a whole chapter on Jesus being the bread of life. So this bread of life is not just material food. It's not just a great sign. Those who just took it as that sort of missed it. This bread of life is the bread that nourishes us completely, that satisfies all our desires. So we need not go to murderous or lustful desires. It is the bread of life. And it's interesting that where do they get this food from that is multiplied? From a boy. From a boy. Now we glorify children in our age, but the boy, someone who could be ignored, right? And so it's when we share, the 5 loaves and 2 fish come from the little one, the one on the margin, the one who is poor, who has nothing. So it's when we share from the poverty of our lives is when we see the power of God. We often think we must wait until we have enough to feed the poor, to do mercy and justice. We also think that there's a limit of God's mercy and justice, that it can be contained. But there is no limit to neither God's bounty nor to God's mercy. And I think we have a beautiful combination in today's readings. We will always have murderous and adulterous political leaders, people who have power, will abuse it for their lustful or murderous selves. And we often say, is there any limit? And let's take a scoundrel maybe that we could all agree on, all right? Putin, right? And I struggle with this myself, and I often say, pay no attention. I'm just talking to myself up here, what I need to hear. It's only my faith that compels me to believe there's a divine spark in Putin. It's been covered up for a long time. But the love of God and mercy extends to Putin. a man who recently bombed a children's hospital. Is there no limit? But there's a part of me that wants to contain God's mercy, to put a limit on it. And I have to catch myself and say that God and the love of God, where there is no evidence, visible evidence to me, resides in Putin. And I have trouble saying that. But that's what Scripture calls us to do. That's what the living Word calls us to do. To break down those boundaries and walls where we want to cut off God's mercy and love to someone who's not doing what we think is right or what we know. It's a personal struggle. But again, it comes from that urge to contain, to put a limit on God. And getting back to Jesus, we will always have the hungry to feed. And we, like the disciples, want to send them away or say, we just don't have enough money. How are we going to do this? It's just not possible. And there's a great saying, we always have enough to help the poor. We never have enough to satisfy the rich. Never. And we often see that even in world economies like our own. So God's power in us can do the same, feeding thousands by sharing the little or all we have instead of waiting till we think we have enough. And we feed them, hopefully, not only with material things and with bread, but a living word, a witness that what we give comes from something else, not just a political ideology or not just but from our love and mercy in God. It comes from something deeper than just maybe a good social worker might provide. Back to the beach. That was the last time we had my mom on the beach. She would die within 2 years of a very progressive disease called supranuclear palsy. But her love continues to bear fruit in us. And like replacing a 12-year-old's wardrobe, even receiving love sometimes costs us, sometimes asks us to make a sacrifice, even as we receive love from another. And I think that sacrifice is breaking down the previous bounds that we had, the limits that we had on one's love or mercy. May this sacrifice here help us today to be more loving and more merciful.